Paul, your turn. Where are you from? What do you farm? Tell us a little bit about your operation.
I farm with my folks by Scribner, Nebraska. We have corn, soybeans, and hay. We've been no-tilling since around the early 2000s, kind of slowly adapted into, tilling the bottoms and leaving the ridges, but then we went just, completely no-tilling, probably around 2005 or so. My dad's brother was no-tilling long before that. He was very much a believer in no-till, probably the late 90s, mid 90s, something like that. In my area overall, no-tilling is probably about 40% of the corn and soybeans. Cover crops are probably about 20%, and the rest is either conventionally or reduced till, so about 30%. That's what I'm just estimating, I guess.
All
That's
right. Anything else, Paul? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's all I have.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you three a series of questions here, and after we get through those, we'll open it up for questions from the group at large. And you're sure welcome to get more specific into any sort of technical aspects of adopting any practices. So we'll start with Mark again. How and why did you start using no-till or reduced till?
Well, I started trying to reduce tillage clear back about the mid 90s. And of course, at that time in the river valleys, we were completely flood irrigated. And I started out with what they consider ridge till. And a lot of it was to simply save labor and save time. And, there were people, it was people were trying it at that time. It was kind of a new practice yet. They were trying to figure out how to manage the ridges and how to manage planting on ridges and everything. But I moved into it and started experimenting, started modifying equipment more than anything to make it work, and just continued, as we progressed and did some conversions from the flood irrigation to pivots. Then I continued basically with the same system. And, it's just the fact that, it's the same system. We're just not doing it on ridges. We're doing it on flat ground. My preference is to go right down the old row. I always have been. I mean, I guess I got in that habit from the ridges, but even on the flat ground, I go right down the old row. I always have thought there's a little advantage to that. You get a little better weed control. If nothing else, it pushes some of that weed seed out to the center, and it makes it a little easier to control. But, labor was probably the biggest factor at the time, but, the thought was always improve soil quality too. And that's been a slow process. It was a terribly slow process at that time. They've learned how to overcome some of that delay as times went on here. But, there was a lot of people tried it back then and gave up in a year or two. They just couldn't see any advantage to it. In fact, there was a downside. And at that time, as I kept working with it and stuff, it was like a 5-year commitment. If you were thinking you wanted to move into it, you better figure about 5 years to really see the advantages of it. But once they started showing up, and you could tell that it was the way to go. And once we got to 10 years or so, then the advantages, the improvements really started to show up. You get to 20 years and it's just the way to be on it. There's just no other method on it. So, but that's why I got into it, was, to save labor and to try and get, improve the soil structure and the soil quality.
Very good. Thank you. Tracy.
Double tapped my mute. I'm curious, Paul and Mark, do both of you still have summer fallow in your rotations?
I don't follow anything. I don't have
Okay.
I have just very little dry land, but
Okay.
I don't follow anything anymore.
You, Paul?
I just every once in a while, like on a real sandy, we have variable soil, and on like a real sandy spot that I know needs a rest,
Mm-hmm.
I'll just seed in some oats, like on an acre or so,
Sure.
and it works out with the crop insurance guys. They're not gonna stress over
Yeah.
1 acre of oats on sand. And
Right.
otherwise I corn and soybeans or oats and alfalfa. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a difference you'll hear between can you incorporate it where that 5 year, the commitment thing, as Mark had said, with labor out here, summer fallow is still in our rotation. Adding sorghum into the rotation has given me an extra year. So far, it hasn't bit me. By that, I mean seeing reduced yield in our wheat, following everything we do here essentially with our dryland is to get a wheat crop and the straw and and hold that moisture where if we tried to continuous crop anything, we'll see 10 bushels, then 20 bushels, and then we're clear down to 30. So keeping that in the rotation is just vital for us. And so with sorghum, I'm mixing in different herbicides and practices. So when Mark talked about labor reasons, when we're out here, prior to my return, we had 2 hired men. And in order for once everything was planted, to keep them busy, we worked our summer fallow. You had to. So as I came back, between reading about it and I brought in the sprayer. So then we were able to echo fallow, which is you don't work anymore, essentially. I haven't sold all the iron yet, just in case, because we have a ton of resistant weeds around here. So nothing's off the chart anywhere. And I imagine there's few farmers that would tell you otherwise or that wouldn't do that. But as Mark said, it is something you have to commit to. I don't believe that anything works 1 year. And if it works 1 year, be prepared because year 2 or 3, it just never will. Nothing works. And one time. So I guess that's how and why I started about doing it. But again, the committing to it. And the main reason we have done it is we have low organic matter. Most people would say, well, I'll do cover crops. Well, I can barely grow a crop, let alone a cover to be followed by a crop with moisture and lack of. So we're ready. And we look at putting cover in our terrace channels. That's what, I sometimes hold enough water there. Maybe I'll catch a year they aren't flooded out and we'll see some benefit. So we do strip till on our center pivots. And the reason for that is to hold every drop of water. We saw some of our pivots shouldn't probably have become a crop ground because of the terrain difference, the height. And so we have a lot of runoff in different spots. But between row directions, multiple years of strip till, changing our nozzle patterns, and all sorts of stuff we're trying, we're keeping the water that we get on our fields for the most part, at least what we irrigate. Now, when we get the 5-inch rain in an hour, nobody wins with that. So that's me, Andrew.
Thanks, Tracy. Paul, your turn. Why and how did you start?
Well, initially, when we were still tilling, we would put on treff land ahead of disking, and then work that smooth. And sometimes when we would disc in the spring, the soil would get fairly cloddy, and it just wasn't a good seed bed, for the soil. So you had to, I don't know, usually make one pass with a field cultivator after that to smoothen it out for soybeans. And we saw, like my uncle was no-tilling and doing okay with that with soybeans. And since we're spraying anyway, we can, maybe skip the tillage, do the spray to keep the weeds down, and we have a Kinsey 3600 bean planter and a second corn planter, Kinsey, and they do a great job of getting in the soil, getting through the residue, and that initially those were the big challenges, was even emergence, even planting depth, and we worked through those on corn or soybeans, and fine tuning it. Like Mark said, you just have to fine tune it every year, and that's kind of how the initial thing went, and we've been pretty happy with it. Sometimes you do have to wait. You might not be able to start, the guys that till might be able to start planting, maybe a week or so sooner, to they warm up the soil with tillage. So you might have to wait and let the soil dry out, or wait for a sunny day to plant, which might mean a little later in April for corn, or a little later in May for beans in our operation. But it works. It still works out. Cost wise, and then it's quality wise too. That helps the emergence of the soybeans and the corn if you'd wait a little bit to let the soil warm up.
Thank you, Paul.
Andrew, can I ask? Paul, you mentioned right at the start, you spread what? Trailan?
Well,
is that a fertilizer?
We used to spray Treflan.
Treflan. I don't know what that is.
That's the yellow. It's got the yellow dye to it. I don't know if you were familiar with that. That was from, and there's still people that do, but that was weed suppressor, that we would spray ahead of disking before we
gotcha.
Grass killer, I guess, mainly. We haven't had to do that for a long time. We've just been going out with 2,4-D and what is it, Authority First, I think now.
Okay. Your residual, that's interesting. None of us mentioned the dry fertilizer, which kind of surprised me. So it was kind of before me that they were using a lot of dry fertilizer out here. And my first year back, Dad tried it and didn't work it in because he thought he had good enough residue that it would hold it in place. And we couldn't really see the yield loss in doing that, but you are at risk of letting it wash a lot more. And so it wasn't something we wanted to continue with. But it is dry fertilizer is usually less expensive. I also don't think it's as consistent or accurate. So I'm willing to put that price in other equipment. But I think that's one area as you think about switching, obviously make sure that's, and then again, you're replanting any seed bed if you're working the ground. So just another one of those things to consider.
Paul, could you share a success story from adopting reduced tillage on your farm? Like you mentioned, well, you have to wait for the soil to dry out before you're planting or warm up, or have you seen a reduce in yield from having to wait sometimes?
Not most years, no. There are select years where the conditions are not gonna have might not have a maximum yield, but we generally have good yields, and we're not waiting. We just want to be smart about when we plant. If the surface is muddy, or if the residue is pushing ahead of the planter, it's probably not a good day to plant. So you just have to wait. Usually it's a sunny day or a little warm, get a little wind going to get the residue dried out, so you can cut through the residue, and then you can get the seed in the ground. So yeah, those would be, I guess, that would be a success story. Would be if you have a good day to plant, you can really, and then you have the moisture benefit later on. You got all that residue on top, you got the seed in the ground, and you're saving. University has done a lot of research on and estimates a lot of water savings if you can keep that residue on the soil from no-till.
Excellent. Thanks, Paul. Tracy,
Yeah,
got
I
a
just have,
success story you'd like to share?
I have a quick one. We have a neighbor with the dryland field above our pivot, and then also the same neighbor is below our pivot. And we get along just fine. But they came and were quite concerned about the runoff that was coming to their lower field. Well, of course, I just panic and I don't want to lose anything. So we switched a nozzle package and the type of nozzle that we're using. We changed the angle of our rows. Of course, you know, it's not immediate in the next 2 years or so. And the success is that now we don't have runoff to the bottom, and I get to call him and say, what are we going to do about your runoff coming into our field? So that has been a success and it makes me smile.
Awesome. Mark, your turn. Success story.
I think the biggest success that I would say is the improvement in the soil quality really overall. We're like Tracy, we've got really light sandy soils for the most part. We got a lot of variability in these valley soils too, but just with the reduced tillage over the years, um, we've improved. If we can get a 2% organic matter, we feel pretty good out here in this country. But in all honesty, what I have seen, we have basically doubled our organic matter content. We were 1% or less on some of this when I started into this. So we have doubled our organic matters just by reducing tillage. And that's pretty good, I think, even though I'd like more yet, and we may get a little more by going into cover crops more, but that was a success to me to get that organic matter improved that much. The other thing I think that I would say, and this is a really slow process, but we've also improved compaction. We have very little compaction left anywhere on it. We had just a plow layer almost everywhere, about a foot or so down. And if you go out and probe your ground, like soil testing or anything, I've seen times I couldn't get through that plow layer with a hand probe. And now that is virtually gone. So that's been another big success that I've seen over the years.
Mark, is that something you also see in like your end rows as well?
Oh, pretty much. I mean, the organic matter is a real key. You build that organic matter, your soil structure improves, you get that freeze thaw cycle over and over again, and you won't see near the compaction just because your soil structure is a lot better, and it'll support them loads that are going over it all the time. You'll see a little more on the end rows just because you have more traffic, but it all goes back to soil structure. I mean, that soil structure is what the salvation is for compaction. It really is.
Mark, have you noticed that you're more sensitive to when you get in the field now? Because mine, like no compaction, means when we're not working the field, we're not out there when it's wet, so that we aren't doing that. That's not quite a rule, because there's some days, but
very seldom are we what I would call wet. But
yeah, that too. Yeah, that too.
Now and then, we do. But there again, the soil structure is the key to that also. Yeah. You can get out there when it's wetter. I've planted in a streaming rain and been able to get through it. I've planted after 2-inch rains and go to the field by noon the next day.
Wow.
And we're not spinning, we're not in the mud, but it's because of the soil structure. That is the whole key. If you can build that soil structure, you get the support and the resiliency there to support that traffic on it. And it really, I mean, it's like I said, it's a slow process, but if you get there, it's a huge improvement too. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Now, we talked earlier a little bit about, well, this next question is about challenges. And we already kind of touched on a few of those challenges, just like the time commitment like how long you're going to have to wait to see these results once you start adopting some of these practices. What are some other challenges, you know, that you've seen or that you've faced in adopting reduced till on your farms? We'll start with Tracy.
I would say you have to be realistic about what a negative really is, because well, an example is when we started, we had a double opener drill. It was a Landau, and we just couldn't end some of our planters that we had. We weren't getting consistent depth. Well, come to find out, you need a no-till drill if you're going to get through some of our harder soils. And so that, had we had that before, I never would have even known that was an issue. So there was a piece of equipment learning curve about that. The other challenges are for us, because we do run our own sprayer on the dry land, and we are holding the moisture, we have to spray for weeds at certain times. And so we will put a few ruts in the field, and that is miserable for the rest of your life, essentially, if you are committed to no-till. The challenges would be, I think Paul mentioned maybe, or even emergence. You have to watch your equipment, I think, a lot more, because you can have dull coulters on your irrigated ground that's strip tilled and you wouldn't know. But if you try to put that same coulter in your shell-borne wheat stubble, you are going to be in misery, and whoever's driving that planter will hate you forever. So, you know, everything is fixable, and that, I think every con has a fix, and you just have to have a plan for it. So I think challenges is the right word, because more so than a negative, because when you have a temperature challenge, like Mark mentioned, I think you don't put in 116-day maturity. You adjust your maturity to match. You maybe don't, where it is, you maybe don't plant the sorghum that doesn't have the emergent strength to get through some of that. You use different seed treatments. You check your germ scores. You just have to kind of think about 8 steps ahead, which I think is more critical to dry land acres. So because we do eliminate some of that with our strip till and ridge till on the irrigated. Plus we can fix problems with irrigation that you can't fix with, you know, unknown rain chances. So those are I'm a better farmer because I've had these challenges, because I have to think about these things. And I also have some great hired men that remind me we've already been through that challenge. And so I don't have to do it 2 or 3 times, 3 times. So we pretty much screw up at least twice before we figure anything out for good, is kind of our motto.
Thanks, Tracy. Paul, is there anything you'd like to add to challenges?
Well, I got 3 just listening to Tracy. And I have others that I agree with Tracy on too, but for corn, we figured out, and we saw our neighbors, they put a starter in furrow, like a liquid starter fertilizer in furrow behind the seed, and then the row close, you know, it's in the ground with the seed, and that really helps on if you have a colder spring for you know, growth and emergence, we feel like. And lately we've just been going with about 2 gallon per acre, or trying to. Sometimes it's hard to get that low with the applicator. You have to drive faster with the planter, or it's a little bit challenging.
We add water, Paul.
Add water?
We just add water to keep everything at 5, because we forget to change our rates. So we kind of cheat because we forget.
Well, I'll write that down. The second thing with soybeans, the last couple of years, we've been putting seed treatment, just the fungicide on the seed. And there was articles in the past few years about white mold and the potential for the seed treatment to actually help affect that. And I feel like last year nobody really had any problems with white mold in our area, but 2 years ago there were problems, and our fields that we had the fungicide on the seed seemed like it helped quite a bit. And maybe that was just a one time thing, but we're going to do that on all of our soybeans. And then the third thing is soil testing for pH in our area. I was under the impression that with no-till, you didn't have to apply lime as often because you're not, I mean, that was from the meetings I went to, I was under that impression. Well, I think it's not true. I think you still need to test the soil for the nutrients, but then also the pH and apply lime. Maybe less amounts more often, or keep track of that, and that helps with weed control. That helps with soil, your crop growth and everything. If you keep your soil pH right close to 7, so neutral. So
Mark, did you see yours change? Because I have heard after about 4 or 5 years or something with the pH that it can have an issue with no-till. And you maybe have been doing it the longest there.
Well, actually, I saw some improvement on high pH ground.
Okay.
We have some lower ends on some of the fields that we have some high pH issues with. And I actually saw an improvement in that. I don't know that the pH changed all that much. We've got 7.5 or a little better. I don't think we've got anything over 8, but 7 to 7.5 is pretty common on some of the lower ends. And I can't say that the pH really changed, but there again, as the soil structure improved, the quality that soil opens up. We got rid of all the clotting, everything in there. The effects are way less on it. The crops seem to tolerate it better, but I think it's because the soil quality has improved more than anything. I didn't, on the other ground, I've never applied lime on anything. We tend to run a little high pH anyway, but the other ground, what I would call just the normal ground or the normal situation, we'll run 6.5 to 7 on most of that. And it doesn't change much. It really doesn't on it. And I've never had the lime in my life on it.
Yeah, and I bet we're similar. Because I asked, everybody says lime helps, so I'm like, I'll put some on. And my agronomist says our soils are, I think he says calcareous or something, and so they don't. It's not needed out here now. That may change, I don't know, but I haven't heard about it out our way. So
yeah.
All right, thanks everybody. I'll just do one last question for you three before we just open it up to the bigger group. In what situations do you still use tillage? Mark, we'll start with you.
Very rarely. The only place I still do a little tillage is when I rotate from corn to soybeans on some of my flood ground. I have to rebuild that ridge. I've actually come up with a system, and this goes back a long ways to the time we started trying to raise soybeans out here in this area on this flood ground. I'm on 36-inch rows still, which is pretty uncommon, but I've stayed with 36 because of the flood ground. But when we started trying to raise soybeans on those 36-inch rows, it just really didn't work. There was, we couldn't get any canopy, and we just couldn't raise a decent crop. So I actually come up with a method where I could drill beans on a ridge, but we had to go in and level down the old corn ridge. And then it's kind of a Kansas trick. You go in and you pre-furrow that. Kansas people used to do that, and then they would go in and pre-irrigate before they would plant. Well, we don't pre-irrigate up here, but we go in, we rebuild that ridge. I come in with a drill, and I can plant 3 drill rows of beans on top of that ridge, skip 2 in the bottom, and go across like that. And then we're done. We don't have to come back to cultivate, ditch, anything else. We're done. But that is the one place that I still have to knock down, have to do a little disking. Other than that, I don't touch a thing ever if I can keep from it. I mean, I just don't.
Tracy.
Well, I always stand ready. We always, in the summer, we have a disc hooked up, but it's not for tillage, it's for fires. So, I mean, just to tell you, we still keep it. We've used to have a 5-foot sweep, 3-foot sweep, and then the small little baby feet sweep. We're down to just one of those now. The problem we have is every now and then we'll get in the field where it's so dry that we can't do anything. And so we consider vertical tillage across the summer fallow just so the drill can get in the ground, and then it waits for rain, we hope. Not very often have we had to do that. But it's just one of those things. I want to make sure I still have stuff in my toolbox so that if I need to, I can. I would say the biggest reason we would have to out here is for some type of weed resistance. Your neighbors sometimes don't have the same belief about keeping weeds down. And so sometimes our turn rows, we just can't, doesn't matter how much we spray them, doesn't matter what residual we put on, it's coming through. And so every now and then we will have to hit it with something just so it doesn't take over.
Paul, any situations you still use tillage?
Not recently, other than pivot tracks, obviously, to level those off. And then we used to have an 8-row and a 4-row cultivator, but we sold the 8-row because we just weren't using them. But I still have the 4-row. If we ever have just a disaster that the Liberty or Roundup or whatever sprayed in the corn, then we can go out and cultivate in row. I think that would be one place that we would till, but I tried very hard to not till because the planters are so good about getting into the ground if the conditions are right. The ones we used to have, they struggled a little bit, but these now are a lot better in our soils getting into the ground. So we like to use the roots, the old roots, if you can keep them intact and in place, as they degrade and rot, they kind of act as tillage because they kind of create a pathway into the soil for air to get in, and just like a tillage pass would.
All right, thank you all. Let's see. Well, Clay had a comment in the chat regarding the Treflin that you guys talked about earlier. It's a yellow herbicide, needs to be tilled in. Prowl or Prowl H2O is a yellow as well and can be watered in. It's used before alfalfa in his area around Broken Bow, or soybeans, dry beans, and peas. I know earlier I had said, put your questions into the chat, but we're a small group here. So if anyone's got questions, just raise your hand and we can unmute you and we can all just have a conversation here.
I was just going to make a comment. This is Clay Govier from Broken Bow. When Mark, you said, committing to the transition is pretty important. If you go from tillage just to no-till in year one, you're probably going to see reduction in yield. And I would, in our area, we're mostly center pivot irrigated. So, and we get a little bit more rain than like the Paxton area, but not a tremendous amount more. But we use cover crops a lot. I think you'll see that transition to less compaction and things like that if you can diversify your rotation and throw some cover crops into the mix. And but yeah, I think anyway, I just wanted to comment on that.
Well, and I agree with that. I know that the cover crops is the next step. I have a hard time managing them. We're beginning to get into them a little bit. I have a hard time getting them in behind corn. It just gets too late. You know, we actually did a late planting behind some beans here a couple of years ago. And I planted a cover crop like the 1st of December. It was just before the ground froze up, and it was a dormant planting. Nothing came up till the next spring. And there's a possibility something like that might work on the corn ground too, but we also pasture all the corn ground with cattle too. So I don't know. It's just really hard for me to manage cover crops on the corn ground. It's something I'd really like to do. And I'm sure the benefits are there also on that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's the trick in Nebraska with the corn soybean rotation is it's just not enough time to get a good cover crop in. You know, that's why we started growing yellow peas years ago, mostly because we wanted to grow a different cover crop. You know, now we're starting to work peas out of the rotation just because we don't have any place to take them.
Right.
Same way out here.
Yeah.
You know, we've started growing rye and got our own cleaner, and so we clean a bunch of rye and sell it to our neighbors and stuff for cover crop. Because you know this is kind of cattle country, so guys like having a rye grown in the spring to graze or whatever, or after they chop corn for silage. So that having a small grain in your rotation, if you can find a place to get rid of it, you know, we can't even grow wheat around here because we have to haul it so far. So we've kind of had to make our own market for that small grain, and you know we actually have a Hagee interseeder, you know, one of those Hagee sprayer, and so we put an interseeder on it so I can go out in August and corn and apply my but I mean that's a humongous investment, and I wouldn't anticipate very many people doing that.
Yeah.
So I guess I have a comment being the cover crop guy.
Hey, Vance.
So when I started no-tilling, it worked awesome. And we kind of had poor man's cover crop on our fallow year. We let the weeds get pretty tall, and we could smoke it with just a little bit of Roundup. And then it got to be where we were dumping tons of chemical out there. And I think we were doing ourselves more damage with the chemicals than we were with tillage when it got to a point. And I just remember saying, I wished I'd have paid. There's a penalty, just like Mark and everybody was talking about. There's a little bit of the penalty when you first start no-tilling. And then when I first started cover cropping, I saw the same thing. And I said, I wished I would have paid both penalties at the same time.
Oh.
And so it's the same concept a little bit. And like I said, I wish I would have paid both penalties at once rather than paying the penalty and then 8 years later paying it again.
Yeah, I would agree with that. We switched to no-till in 2009 and then cover crops the last 8 years now. And I wish I would have just done both at the same time, but nonetheless seen benefits to both. So, and I'm located in Dodge. I'm located in Dodge County where we have 29 inches. So
yeah, we don't cover crop everything. Don't get me wrong. My environment, I'm 20 miles from Mart. My environment's a little like Tracy. There's times we just can't do it because we can't even grow a crop, let alone a cover crop. But when we can, I think it's important that we do.
Yeah. I saw Art had his hand up.
Actually, I didn't. I don't know how it showed that. Sorry.
That's okay. I didn't want you to get missed out.
I got a question for Andrew and Kalee. Do you have any surveys on how much no-tilling that goes on in Nebraska or cover crops?
I don't have that handy, but I'm sure that's information I could find.
I can put it in the chat. You have to create an account. It's free, but there is a satellite-based estimate of both tillage and cover crops from, I think, the period of early, maybe a couple years ago, time window, some like 2020 through 2023. So I can share that website.
Thank you, Nathan. That's awesome.
Yep.
I know it used to seem like as soon as you hit about Arapahoe headed east in Nebraska, that no-till was not even on the radar. And as I get towards Hastings, I still see quite a bit of it, tillage that is, but I do see it interspersed now. And so I can't tell if it's one producer or if it's a timing thing just when I'm driving through. But it does seem like some of those with some of the more rain blessings are seeing maybe some of the benefits with a no-till, maybe just for a pass or two. I just see it all blow away over here if we do more than a fraction of a pass even.
I know, just to share, like anecdotally, in the area I live around North Bend in the Platte River Valley, eastern Nebraska, it's very heavy, dark clay soil, and adoption of no-till is very slow there, or any reduced till for that matter. And I'm gonna just call out Nathan. I talked to you earlier about kind of a trial you were working on with a couple of growers with reduced till in similar area around Fremont. And just, I was wondering if you could share a little bit about, what their experiences were with strip till.
Yeah, so Dodge County is fairly unique in parts of the Missouri River Valley and parts of the Platte River Valley where there's 50-60% clay content. So some of the highest in the state. So full tillage was still used quite a bit in the area. So people were looking at no-till and strip till. A number of farmers, probably about 10 years ago. And then it was just observational data, but really saw a lot of good improvements with moving the strip till. One, to create that pore I guess the connection of pores in between and not disturbing that, but also having some of that drying out and warming up on those heavy clay soils was really a good combination, moving from full width to strip till. After large rains and different events, I haven't been back to see what we unfortunately don't have like long-term no-till compared to long-term strip till, but strip till was definitely there's always some negatives, right, to every production practice, but it had a lot of positives. So yeah.
Good, great, thanks, Nathan. Anybody else got comments, questions?
If nobody else does, I do have one comment on what he just said about the strip till versus no till. So I've got two side-by-side fields. One's been long time strip till and one's been long time no till. The infiltration rates are dramatically different on those two fields. Organic matter is pretty much the same. We went from one in the low ones, like 1.1, to now we're in the high 3s to 4. But the infiltration rate is vastly different on the one that's been no-tilled and cover cropped. Like unbelievable. Seems like a bar trick difference.
And just to dovetail on that, and this is a very anecdotal thing on our farm, but in the 2012 when it was nasty drought and really hot, we had a field where I'm not 100% sure why we did this, but in the same field we strip tilled part of it and then we no-tilled the rest, and I think the strip till the strip till ended up being like 20 or 30 bushel off the no-till, and it was 100% just because of water usage. I mean, and maybe the extra fertilizer due to the strip till actually was detrimental, but I think it was just, that much tillage, you're still burning up moisture. So, take that for what it's worth. But I know when I drive by a field that's been fully strip tilled, it looks like it had a lot of tillage.
Yeah. But we're both in those scenarios you both spoke about, they're dry land fields, correct?
This was irrigated.
Oh, it was. But that was the 2012 when it was so dry, right? Okay. That's interesting. Okay. We've switched to well, we're debating. It's year 2, so we'll see. We've got we're on 30-inch, but I went with a split row planter, and we're using the 15-inch for beans and milo. And we did see a pretty dramatic reduction in our beans off of prior years, but most people did also. So we're going to see, but as of right now, it is really beneficial for the milo. And so I think we start really watching the emergence to see if it warrants the additional money versus a drill, the no-till drill. which we're at 10s on that. So we'd probably do 20, but just something, but it does cause a lot of problems on the milo into the Shelbourne wheat stubble. We're having to deal with some of the plugging. I talked to you about sharp coulters, and on 15-inch rows, it was a nightmare in some fields, depending on the way the straw was laying. So we had some creative planting maps trying to find the right angle to hit, but just kind of a side note.
Andrew, and everyone, I have to sign off, but before I do, Mark, I have to ask if Ole's Big Game is still open.
Well, yeah, they're still going. My wife's an icon down there. She's been there about as long as they have on it, but they still do a good business on it. Yeah, they get a lot of tourist traffic and stuff. If you've never been there, it's worth seeing.
I still have a sweatshirt that my dad bought me when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So, well, I will let you all carry on, but thanks everybody, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks, Kaylee.
Thanks, you bet.
Well, we got just a few minutes left here on our assigned time. Is there anything else anyone wants to talk about?
I would make just one comment on the strip till scenario again. I mean, out here in my area, strip till has become pretty popular. There's a lot of guys have moved into that, and there's some advantages to it. The problem I guess I have with it is you still have that tillage factor in there. It's it's a really nice way to put down fertilizer. I will say that, but you do still have that tillage factor, and I think that's part of the reason you're seeing a difference in the infiltration rates and stuff with it too. No matter what it is, if you're going to have tillage, anything that says tillage, whether it's ridge till, strip till, whatever, if there's tillage involved, it's going to have an effect on it. The absolute less and the least you can do, the better off you're going to be, I think. But it is a really popular practice out here also.
What surprises me, Mark, and I didn't know this, but all the conservation and climate smart, they don't consider strip till tillage. It is considered no-till in all the grants and things you do. And that just blows me away. I mean, you are disturbing the soil. I don't understand it, but it still qualifies.
Yeah. Well, and it's, there's some pretty deep tillage involved with it, which a lot of guys like to think they're breaking compaction and stuff. But I don't know, tillage is tillage. I don't care how it is. It's there. You're affecting the biology is more than anything. You're disturbing that biology, and it just, it has to recover from that. And any time if you're only tilling a third of the surface versus all of it, you're not doing as much damage. But any place you're doing that tillage, you're disturbing that biology and doing damage to it, I think.
I don't think none of us have talked about baling the corn stalks. We did that 3 years ago on corn, and I happened to bail. I baled about 4 rows, and then I left 4 rows, and so it kind of became a test for the next year on no-till soybeans. How what the reaction was to the soil, because I just no-tilled the whole thing, and it planted fine. But later in the year, and this is a dry land field, you could really see the maturity and I don't have a yield monitor, but you could see how where you bale the corn stalks, so there's no cover, how much quicker the soybeans matured compared to the soybeans right next door that had the residue. So that's something to think about. And maybe cover crops would work there. If you bale the corn stalks, you could go in with cover crops after that, maybe to help that situation out. I don't know, but
all right. Well, on that note, we are out of time, and thank you so much to all of you. You're a wealth of knowledge. Really appreciate everybody participating. And our next webinar will be on March 20th at 10 a.m. and that one will be focused on cover crops. So thanks again, everybody. Really appreciate you.